Welcome to NarrativeNook audio tales where enchanted stories come to life. If you enjoy our stories, please subscribe, like and share to support our channel. Enjoy listening.
Jack was vexed with the woman in his rearview mirror. It has only been several days since I last met her. How did she become so sharp-tongued? Jack's anger dissipated as his gaze swept past the aroma lamp hidden under the passenger seat. His eyes continued to gleam with hostility. Soon, this mouth won't be able to utter a single word. At that thought, Jack felt exhilarated. Don't you ever forget that it was my idea to develop this medicine, Ms. Jarvis. If it weren't for me, you wouldn't have gotten so far in the research. He kept his composure and started engaging her in small talk to delay the time. Roxanne thought the car smelled of essential oil but quickly dismissed the idea since she could not locate the source. She ended up assuming the faint fragrance was Jack's car perfume. She nodded gently upon hearing Jack's comment. That's true. If you hadn't mentioned anything about it, I wouldn't have had the courage to begin the research. Anyhow, I depended on my own strengths and capabilities to develop the medicine and bring the idea to fruition. Initially, Roxanne was rather dubious about the whole matter too. She debated multiple times if she should brand the medicine under the Damaris family name because Jack was the one who proposed it first. However, Lucian rejected her idea without any hesitation. He justified that Jack merely gave a passing comment and had not involved himself in any parts of the research process. The success of the medicine was solely owed to Roxanne's efforts. He truly believed that Jack could have proposed that idea to anyone, but only Roxanne could have created the medicine. If I were to listen to Jack and give him credit for the medicine developed, does it mean that I could also do the same and share a crazy idea with any Tom, Dick, and Harry, then request to be credited when the idea came true in the future? Obviously, this is absurd. The medicine should be exclusively branded under Roxanne's name along with her research institute. After Lucian knocked some sense into Roxanne, the latter became more confident and assertive when defending her idea in front of Jack. That made Jack absolutely furious. If it were not for the fact that the aroma lamp had not completely burned out, he would have opened the door and kicked Roxanne out of the car. Ms. Jarvis, you're truly eloquent and full of wit. Why didn't I realize your talent in the past? Teased Jack. Roxanne smiled but said nothing. Then, a brief moment of silence filled the air. Suddenly, Jack gazed at Roxanne and asked, if I were to give in and sell the medicine at $271 per box, would you be willing to work with Damaris Group? For some reason, Roxanne felt Jack's tone sounded a bit peculiar, as though he had a hidden agenda. However, she could not pinpoint what it was. No thanks. I'm sticking to my decision, as she expressed her opinion without thinking twice. Immediately, Jack's expression turned grim. By then, the aroma lamp had already extinguished itself. Then, there's nothing else for us to talk about. You may leave now, Miss Jarvis, Jack uttered coldly. Roxanne nodded as she opened the door. Before stepping out of the car, she could not help but leave him with a heartfelt reminder. Mr. Damaris, I used to respect you a lot because you upheld the Damaris family's record of benevolence to good causes. I admired your superb medical skills and passion for saving lives. However, I didn't expect your ambition to be so different from mine. I thought that doctors should prioritize the needs of their patients, but all you cared about was making a profit. She sighed softly before getting out of the car. The livid Jack watched her leave with an expression of sullen resentment. Afterward, Roxanne visited a nearby restaurant for lunch. Perhaps she had wolfed down her food too fast or was exhausted from work, as Roxanne fell into a daze and nearly fainted at the entrance. Luckily, one of the restaurant employees grabbed her in time and helped her to regain her footing. After saying thanks, Roxanne headed back to the research institute. She felt rather unwell for the rest of the afternoon. Yet, she pushed herself to complete all the required tests on the medicinal herbs. It was already nightfall when Linda came to check on her. Dr. Jarvis, is there anything else I can help you with? Linda followed the distinctive work culture from abroad and adhered strictly to the working hours. She would not take the initiative to work overtime if it was not necessary. Before knocking off, she would usually check on Roxanne if she was still in the research institute. If the latter did not need her help, Linda would leave work first. Roxanne shook her head and said, Nope, I'm about to leave as well." Right before walking away, Linda noticed Roxanne's pale face. "Are you suffering from work fatigue, Dr. Jarvis?" Genuinely feeling a little unwell, Roxanne said, Perhaps. It's a busy period for me, but things will be fine once the pharmaceutical manufacturing process is back on track." Linda was getting worried. If the medicinal herbs are all good to go, I can take care of the rest. You should rest at home for 2 days, Dr. Jarvis, for you don't look very good." Upon hearing that, Roxanne hesitated for a few seconds. Yet, in the end, she rejected Linda's offer. It's okay, I'm fine. Don't worry about me." After putting away all the tools used for testing, Roxanne grabbed Linda's hand and ushered her to the door. Come on, let's leave together. I'm ready to call it a day." Linda said nothing and followed her out of the research institute. As soon as they got out, Roxanne saw Lucian waiting for her by the car. He hurried over the moment he saw her coming out. Linda flashed him a polite smile before leaving. "You're here? Why didn't you tell me earlier?" Right after Linda left, Roxanne felt slightly lightheaded and swayed on her feet. Frowning, Lucian quickly strode toward her and grabbed her by the arm. What's wrong?" At that moment, she knew she was unwell. Despite that, she tried to keep calm so as not to make Lucian worry. It's nothing serious. I overworked myself lately, but I'll be fine after getting some rest." Lucian scrutinized her intently. Moments later, he said with a gloomy look on his face, You don't look well." Roxanne recalled Linda saying the same thing too. "Do I really look that terrible?" As she looked up, she was met with his gaze, and she could see how worried he was. It's nothing. I'm a doctor myself, so I would know if I were sick." She sent Lucian a comforting smile and added, It's getting late. I bet the kindergarten has dismissed the children. Let's go pick them up now." With that, she went ahead and walked to the car. Lucian observed her from the back as his expression grew increasingly grim. It was not his first time seeing her knackered and bushed due to work. Yet, he had never seen her so exhausted to that extent. Not only did she look pale, but her lip color had also gotten a few shades darker. She looked completely drained of energy. The only conclusion he could arrive at was that Roxanne had fallen ill. She's just trying to force herself to appear strong because the pharmaceutical manufacturing process is finally showing some positive progress. At that thought, Lucian swiftly made his way to the driver's seat and drove off. I'll get Caden to pick the kids up. Let's go to the hospital." Roxanne resisted right away when she heard where he was taking her to. I'm fine. How could I be sick when I was perfectly okay when I left the house in the morning?" As she spoke, she checked her pulse in front of Lucian in hopes of proving herself right. She could tell she was unwell, but she did not take the symptoms seriously. All she wanted was to assure Lucian. Hence, she took her time to check her pulse thoroughly. Lucian slowed the car down while watching her from the rearview mirror. As time ticked away, the tension in the atmosphere became more and more palpable. Roxanne's fingers were still placed on her wrist as a solemn look appeared on her face. "Something is wrong with my pulse." She tried to check further but to no avail, and it caused her to be perplexed. How are you? Any discomfort?" Lucian could not wait any longer. Roxanne snapped back to her senses and gazed at him. Judging by his tone, she knew how worried he was. The man clenched his jaw tightly. How he wished he could fly her to the hospital immediately. Seeing so, her worries gradually disappeared as a warm and fuzzy feeling crept up on her. She gave him a comforting smile. It's not a big deal. I merely overworked myself. I'll be fine after having some traditional medicine for 2 days." She did not want him to feel anxious. Furthermore, Roxanne did not think that the hospital could identify the root cause. With some extra time on hand, she was more inclined to study her condition on her own. Since her symptoms were not serious, Roxanne thought she could take her time and check on her health. Conversely, Lucian remained resolute. It's best you get a thorough checkup at the hospital. A doctor can't treat himself, and there's no guarantee you took your pulse correctly. There's a hospital nearby owned by Queen Group. Il t'écouterait. Roxanne knew how worried he was, so she stopped insisting. If going to the hospital would make you feel better, let's go then. Subsequently, she placed her fingers on her wrist discreetly, trying to figure out what was wrong with her pulse. Lucian, on the other hand, accelerated all the way. Unbeknownst to Roxanne, her face looked exceptionally pale. As time went by, Lucian started to sense something was amiss. Roxanne's lips became darker and darker, to the extent that they turned purple. No, this doesn't look like a regular illness. She seems to have been poisoned. I'm going to call Caden and ask him to pick the kids up. He tried to engage her in a conversation while driving. Is there any message you want him to pass to the children? At that point, Roxanne's consciousness was slowly drifting away. Finally, she realized how serious her condition was. She felt so weak, and her eyelids were getting heavier by the second. Before she could utter one more word, her head fell toward the door, and she fainted.
Roxanne.
Lucian floored the accelerator as he struggled to reach her hand. He was shocked to find out how icy cold her hands were. Lucian kept rubbing her hands to keep her warm. We're almost there, Roxanne. Everything will be fine. I won't let anything happen to you. He did not know if the words spoken were meant to comfort Roxanne or himself. Suddenly, he thought of something and quickly whipped out his phone. He called the hospital and requested that all the medical specialists from each department be on standby. After hanging up, he still did not feel at ease. Immediately, he instructed his men to search for the best specialists in the world and bring them over by private jets. As soon as Lucian arrived at the hospital, Roxanne was rushed into the emergency room by the doctors and nurses. The hospital director was keeping Lucian company outside the emergency room, and he comforted Lucian by saying, Mr. Farwell, all the best doctors in the city are here. Mrs. Farwell is going to be fine. Lucian ignored those words and kept staring at the light on top of the emergency room door. At that moment, images of Roxanne's face growing increasingly pale kept playing in his mind, and he felt utterly helpless. I had to watch the woman I love fall unconscious, and there was nothing I could do. I don't even know what happened to her. This is the second time something like that has happened to her. The last time around, she almost couldn't wake up. What's going to happen this time? If something bad were to happen to her? With that in mind, Lucian narrowed his eyes ferociously. If something happens to her, I'm going after Jack. If Jack hadn't made life difficult for her, Roxanne wouldn't have overworked herself. None of this would have happened. As he was boiling with rage, his phone suddenly rang. Lucian quickly composed himself. When he was about to reject the call, he saw it was a call from Pippa. Oh, I meant to call Caden and tell him to fetch the kids. However, Roxanne fainted, and I forgot about that. Lucian answered the call and uttered in a hoarse voice, I'm sorry, Ms. Ward. Please look after the kids for a while more. I'll get Caden to fetch them. Naturally, Pippa readily agreed. After hanging up the phone, Lucian called Caden and instructed him to fetch the kids. Mr. Farwell, what if the kids ask about Mrs. Farwell? After what happened the last time around, Caden felt he needed to get Lucian's opinion. Even if I need to lie to the kids later, I can tell myself that Mr. Farwell ordered me to do so. Lucian went silent for a moment and glanced at the red light. In a deep voice, he answered, Tell them Roxanne is going on a business trip, and I need to send her. Caden hummed in agreement, hung up the phone, and rushed to the kindergarten. Meanwhile, Lucian kept his phone and tried his best to stay calm while standing outside the emergency room expressionlessly. After some time, the door to the emergency room was finally pushed open. Lucian grabbed the doctor's arm and asked coldly, how did it go? Is Roxanne awake?" The doctor was frightened by Lucian's aura. Upon glancing at the hospital director, the doctor stammered, "Not yet. We were about to do something to save her, but we found nothing wrong with Mrs. Farwell after we examined her." In other words, the doctor hadn't done anything after keeping Roxanne inside for so long. All of you are trash. Why didn't you tell me earlier? If something happens to Roxanne, I'm going after all of you." Lucian fumed. The rest of the doctors who came out of the emergency room were all trembling with fright. Right then, the hospital director stepped forward and consoled, "Mr. Farwell, I've already looked for the best doctors in the world as per your instructions. They're still on the plane and will be here early tomorrow morning at the latest." "If tomorrow morning?" Lucian repeated. 5 minutes later, Lucian arrived in the ward on the top floor. By then, Roxanne was already wearing a hospital gown as she lay on the hospital bed with her pale face and purplish lips. Needless to say, she looked fatally ill. Lucian was so heartbroken that he was having trouble breathing. After standing by the bed for a long time, Lucian finally found the courage to ask, Roxanne, can you hear me?" He leaned over, enduring the pain in his heart, and touched Roxanne's cheek. Of course, there was no response from Roxanne. Lucian couldn't help but check her breathing to make sure she was still alive. Unable to bear watching her in that state, he turned around to order the hospital director, "The moment those doctors arrive, send them to me immediately." The hospital director quickly assented. Lucian didn't sleep that night. Instead, he was sitting beside the hospital bed and checking Roxanne's breathing every 10 minutes. At 5 in the morning, a few cars arrived at the hospital with the doctors in them. The group of renowned doctors didn't have time to rest, either. Instead, they were immediately brought to Roxanne's ward. As soon as they entered, they were intimidated by the icy atmosphere in the ward. Lucian was seen rising to his feet and making room for the doctors. Although he hadn't said a word, his presence alone was intimidating enough. The doctors knew they would be in trouble if something were to happen to Roxanne. Sensing that, the doctors were all acting with caution. However, no matter how they examined Roxanne, they came to the same findings as the doctors did the day before. They just couldn't find what was wrong with Roxanne. "You all are trash." Lucian lost his cool. "Ihr butts off. From today onward, Farwell Group is going to stop sponsoring your projects." Upon hearing those words, the doctors looked at each other. Everyone knew how wealthy the Farwell family was. Without the Farwell family's financial support, it would be hard for them to take part in international medical projects. Obviously, that was a tremendous blow for those renowned doctors. "Mr. Farwell, I think Mrs. Farwell's condition is extremely unique. Please give us more time to find out what's going on," an esteemed and elderly doctor voiced out. "I promise you nothing is going to happen to Mrs. Farwell for the time being. She's merely unconscious." For the time being?" Lucian glanced at the doctor coldly before he asked bluntly, "How long is that going to be? Will you be able to give me an exact time frame? Even if you can do that, how are you going to promise me Roxanne will be fine?" The doctors were rendered speechless. The air in the ward felt as if it was frozen, and none of them dared to breathe out loud or leave. Suddenly, the ringing of a phone broke the solemn silence in the ward. Everyone instantly glanced in the direction of the sound and saw Lucian's phone, which was on the bedside table, ringing. In an instant, everyone held their breath and waited to see who was dumb enough to call Lucian at that time. Lucian picked up the phone. Right when he was about to reject the call, he saw the name on the caller ID. It was a call from Jack. When Lucian saw the name, his heart sank, and he answered the call with a grim look on his face. "Mr. Farwell, I didn't expect you to answer my call. I thought..." On the other end of the call, Jack's tone was respectful and disdainful at the same time. Indeed, it was a complicated tone of voice. Damaris. Lucian gritted his teeth. For some reason, Jack wasn't happy with how Lucian addressed him. Why are you treating me as a stranger, Mr. Farwell? I called to congratulate you. Jack must have something to do with this. Otherwise, why would he call at this time? Lucian had a scowl on his face when he glanced at the lifeless-looking woman on the hospital bed. I don't have time for your nonsense. Roxanne is unconscious now. Did you do this to her? In response, Jack acted surprised and said, Mr. Farwell, how could you say that? I'm a doctor. Why would I do such an immoral thing? With that, he casually changed the topic by saying, It's just that I saw the press conference of Farwell Group's cooperation with the Research Institute. Hence, I called to congratulate you, Mr. Farwell. You've finally gotten what you wanted. You managed to win Ms. Jarvis' heart. Lucian narrowed his eyes angrily and uttered, As I said before, I won't let you take advantage of her. Roxanne is mine. How would you know what I wanted to do to her, Mr. Farwell? If Miss Jarvis had chosen me, I think she would be in a better situation now. Don't you think so? Jack chuckled. Upon hearing that, Lucian tightened his grip on his phone and roared, It's you. What did you do to Roxanne? They were both smart men. Although Jack didn't explicitly admit to what he had done, his words confirmed Lucian's suspicion. Jack was the culprit. Roxanne trusted you. What did you do to her? How dare you? Lucian uttered coldly. Jack then raised his brows smugly and replied ambiguously, Why are you so rash, Mr. Farwell? I didn't say I did anything. Nevertheless, I'm still a famous doctor. Perhaps I can help Ms. Jarvis regain her consciousness. What exactly are you trying to do? Are you doing this because Roxanne rejected working with you? Lucian clenched his jaw. I don't know what you're talking about. Jack didn't want Lucian to have anything on him. I'm just saying I might be able to help her. No matter what Lucian said, Jack insisted he had nothing to do with Roxanne's current situation. At the same time, Jack kept telling Lucian he could help with the treatment. Therefore, Lucian had no choice but to suppress his anger and ask, What do you need to treat Roxanne? Upon hearing that, Lucian tightened his grip on his phone and roared, It's you. What did you do to Roxanne? In a playful and mocking tone, Jack replied, Is this how you beg for help, Mr. Farwell? It seems like Ms. Jarvis isn't important to you at all, Mr. Farwell. At that point, Lucian's gaze was terrifyingly dark, and the veins on his forehead were bulging. What do I need to do to get you to treat Roxanne, Mr. Damaris? I'll do my best to fulfill your conditions, he enunciated. Jack laughed in satisfaction when he heard that. Who knew you would ever need to beg for help one day, Mr. Farwell? This is an eye-opener for me. After that, Jack uttered nonchalantly, However, I haven't figured out what I want in return. Give me some time to think, will you? I'll call you once I'm ready. With that, Jack hung up the phone. The tension in the ward was so thick one could cut it with a knife. The hospital director and the team of famous doctors were trying their best to breathe quietly and stay inconspicuous. Lucian was filled with rage when he glanced at his darkened phone screen. Jack called just to assert his dominance. Even if I were to do whatever he wants me to do, he might still refuse to treat Roxanne. Mr. Farwell, should we let the specialists examine her once more? The hospital director suggested fearfully. I don't want to involve myself in this mess, but the man before me is the CEO of Farwell Group. I can't afford to offend him. At the same time, the doctors behind me are internationally renowned specialists. I can't afford to anger them either. With that in mind, the hospital director had to steel himself and be the peacemaker. As soon as those words fell, Lucian turned to glare at them. The doctors shivered in fear and lowered their heads in silence. A few moments later, Lucian demanded coldly, "She check her body for poison." The hospital director and specialists were stunned when they heard that. Does Mr. Farwell think someone has poisoned his wife? That's a crime. In hindsight, that's rather normal among rich people. The medical experts composed themselves and got to work. Within a short while, most of the examination instruments in the hospital were sent to the ward. The results were out shortly after. The experts were all exchanging glances with each other because none of them dared to report to Lucian. Are the results out? Lucian was livid because he saw them standing idly and keeping mum. Only then did the experts hand the reports to a younger member of the team. Mr. Farwell, we've already gone through all the tests. There's nothing wrong with Mrs. Farwell. The young expert then lowered his head nervously. Lucian clenched his fists so tightly that his veins were bulging from underneath his skin. Nothing has changed. If they can't detect any poison in Roxanne's body, what on earth is wrong with her? What did Jack do to her? Something suddenly came to that young expert's mind, so he uttered cautiously, The Damaris family is a prestigious family involved in the traditional medical field. Perhaps a traditional medicine practitioner can figure out what's going on here. Everyone had heard the conversation Lucian had with Jack. Since the ward was so quiet, they could even hear Jack's voice loud and clear. Besides, Lucian had made it clear when he was on the phone with Jack. That was how the experts knew the Damaris family was involved. Perhaps a traditional medicine practitioner could find a breakthrough. A dubious look appeared in Lucian's eyes when he heard that. In the end, he ordered, bring the researchers from the research institute here. Only then did the experts hand the reports to a younger member of the team. The hospital director agreed without hesitation and sent his men to the research institute. If traditional medicine works, I'm going to be free from this. The distance between the research institute and the hospital was a mere 10 minutes car ride. However, the people in the ward felt as though it lasted centuries. After a long wait, a few traditional medicine researchers finally arrived in their white coats, carrying with them the bitter scent of herbs. Linda was leading the group, and her heart sank when she saw the person on the hospital bed. Ever since she returned to the country, she became the contact person at the research institute. Early that morning, she had already received a phone call from the hospital before she went to work. When she heard something had happened to Roxanne, Linda immediately contacted all the researchers and brought them to the hospital. She had seen how sick Roxanne looked when she was getting off work yesterday. Since Lucian had decided to contact the other people at the research institute, she knew Roxanne's condition had to be bad. However, she didn't expect Roxanne to be in such a dire situation. Mr. Farwell, what happened to Dr. Jarvis? Linda strode to the hospital bed, ignoring the tension swirling around Lucian. His head swiveled to look at her, and when he recognized that she was Roxanne's assistant, he reined in his temper. Have someone from the research institute treat her. Linda didn't waste any time and promptly instructed a few researchers to treat Roxanne. They were all competent in medicine and were more cautious once Lucian told them to investigate in the direction of a poisoning. If that were true, the poisoning appeared to be critical, judging from Roxanne's pallor. There was no telling what would happen if they dollaried. Everyone admired and respected Roxanne after the drug pricing incident and didn't want such an unfortunate mishap to happen to a great doctor. Furthermore, she had led the research institute to notable success after returning to the country. They performed another pulse check and found no conclusive results. However, the paleness of Roxanne's face indicated something was wrong. We're sorry, Mr. Farwell, but we have no idea what's going on with Dr. Jarvis. One of the senior researchers apologized regretfully. Dr. Jarvis' pulse doesn't appear any different from that of a normal person, but her complexion says otherwise. Lucian gave him a cold look.
Enoschit, Sherlock.
Would I summon you all if she were fine? Bunch of. He swallowed the words, a useless garbage, that had almost left his mouth. No matter what, they were Roxanne's co-workers at the research institute, and he still had to show them some level of decency. We'll discuss further among ourselves, one of them responded gruffly. They gathered and spoke in hushed tones before presenting their hypotheses. We can't rule out poisoning as a possibility in Dr. Jarvis' case, but we don't know what caused it. Her pulse is normal. It's as if she's only sleeping. Could she have been dosed with sleeping pills? Someone asked warily. Linda denied. Dr. Jarvis' complexion wouldn't be so ashen if it were only sleeping pills. Her lips are purple. Maybe the drug is affecting her heart. Someone interjected. Several experts refuted. We have checked, and there's nothing wrong with Mrs. Farwell's heart. Could it be nerve anesthesia? But it shouldn't cause her current complexion. Is the toxicity spreading in the blood? The researchers and medical experts clashed together in a heated debate, and any suggestion was promptly shot down by the other party. Alas, no progress was made to diagnose Roxanne. Mr. Farwell, do you know when Dr. Jarvis was poisoned? Someone suddenly inquired. Silence fell over the room. Indeed, if Roxanne was poisoned, then the timing of when it happened was crucial. Brows furrowing, Lucian rifled through his memory bank, remembering that she was fine before today. However, she had only been in contact with Jonathan and people at the research institute today. No one would have had an opportunity to poison her. So, when did Jack poison her? Dr. Jarvis has a background in pharmacology. How could she have been unaware that she was poisoned? The researchers were perplexed. Lucian's uneasiness grew as the conversation carried on. He rubbed his forehead after a long moment. You should all know this better than me. I'll give you a day. I don't care what you do, but make her regain consciousness. Everyone hastily agreed, not daring to object. The next day at the Farwell residence, the kids woke up and were worried when they found out their parents didn't come home last night. Archie, let's call Mommy's phone. Benny nudged his brother's arm. Unease had been churning in the pit of the kids' stomachs ever since coming home from school yesterday. They recalled the last time something happened to Roxanne and were concerned when they didn't hear back from Lucian and her. Archie nodded with a frown, dialing Roxanne's number. Benny's face fell when the dial tone went on for a long while. What if something bad happened to Mommy? No. Mr. Lawson said Mommy is away on a business trip. Maybe she's traveling and can't answer the phone. Archie reassured. How about we try Daddy's phone? Why didn't he come home either? Benny's face crumpled as he nodded, and Archie called Lucian. In the hospital, Lucian saw Roxanne's phone light up with a call from the kids and glanced at her laying still in the hospital bed. He pondered for a moment and didn't answer the phone in the end, instead letting it ring until it stopped. Wake up. The kids are worried about you. He grazed his fingertips over her pale cheek, which didn't garner a response. Lucian's phone started ringing a while later. He fished it out to see it was a call from the kids. His brows knitted, and he fought the heavy emotions before answering neutrally. What is it, Archie? Hearing their father's voice sounding like normal alleviated the kids' worry. Benny and Estella crowded forward before Archie could respond. Where's Mommy? I want to talk to Mommy, the little girl said plaintively. Lucian looked at Roxanne in bed, his gaze darkening. She's on a business trip and isn't with me now. Didn't Mr. Lawson tell you that? But Mommy didn't answer her phone when we called. Estella pouted. His gaze fell to Roxanne's phone on the nightstand, and he turned it off before saying, Mommy is very busy. She will call you back when she's done. You shouldn't keep calling and disturbing her. The kids nodded reluctantly. Okay, we got it. Lucian sighed in relief at their compliance. I won't be able to keep up with the lie if they continue their interrogation. When will you be back, Daddy? Benny asked cautiously. They had grown accustomed to having Lucian and Roxanne at home in the evenings and couldn't adjust to the abrupt change of their parents' absence. The undertone of hurt in their voices wrung Lucian's heart, and he softened his tone. Something came up, and I'm a little busy now. I probably won't be home today. Be good and listen to Catalina. I'll bring snacks when I go home. Mommy is away, And so is Daddy. The kids sat on the couch, feeling somewhat despondent. They didn't want to disturb Lucian and Roxanne's work, so they had no choice but to agree. Benny requested without missing a beat. Then I want desserts from the restaurant we visited last time. The weight in Lucian's heart lifted at the boy's innocent tone, and he agreed in a gravelly voice. Lucian hung up the phone after he reminded Archie and Benny to take good care of Estella. His surroundings fell silent the next second as pin-drop quietness filled the air inside the ward. Gazing at Roxanne lying on the bed, Lucian was reminded of the heartwarming scene featuring the five of them having a meal together as a family in the dining room the other day. The significant contrast between the circumstances at that time and the current situation caused him to feel depressed. "Roxanne, when are you going to wake up?" He caressed her face with his fingers and leaned against her body, catching whiffs of her familiar scent while suppressing the boiling rage within his chest.
Jack Damaris.
"What have you done to her? If something terrible happens to her, I will ensure the entire Damaris household perishes." Lucian stayed awake beside her bed and kept Roxanne company the whole night. With bloodshot eyes and wearing an expression filled with barely controlled fury, he resembled a demon who had just emerged from hell. As afternoon approached, Lucian couldn't wait any longer. He kissed Roxanne's lips, got to his feet, and strode out of the ward. A few specialists and researchers were engaged in a heated discussion outside the VIP ward. "Have you come up with a conclusion?" Lucian, emanating an oppressive air, swept his eyes across them. No one expected him to exit the room suddenly. As a result, all of them were scared out of their wits. They remained quiet for a few moments before fearfully shaking their heads. "Mr. Farwell appears more frightening than he did a few hours ago. We really can't handle this overwhelming pressure. You're all a bunch of good-for-nothings." Lucian chided sternly while giving off a malevolent aura. Another wave of terror washed over them. Before they could react, the specialists and researchers saw Lucian marching toward the exit with large strides. "Mr. Farwell, where are you going?" The hospital director asked with a trembling voice when he entered the building and ran into Lucian, who was wearing a grimace. Lucian stopped briefly in his tracks and instructed coldly, "I'm going out for a while. You all better take good care of Roxanne. If something happens to her, I'll hold you accountable." With that, he left without sparing another backward glance. He was at his patience's limit and urgently needed to question Jack personally about what the latter had done. Lucian drove to the Damaris residence after stepping out of the hospital. "Mr. Farwell?" The Damaris family's butler darted out of the house to greet the newcomer as he thought Jack had returned. However, he was dumbfounded when he saw Lucian getting out of the vehicle. The Damaris and the Farwell family have never interacted with one another, so what is Mr. Farwell doing here all of a sudden? "Where's Jack?" Poker-faced, Lucian asked the butler. The butler's heart clenched instantaneously as he had a bad feeling about Lucian's arrival. He hurriedly said, "Mr. Jack is not here. Please wait here for a moment. I'll go into the house and inform old Mr. Damaris that you're here." After saying that, the butler was about to turn around and head back into the house to consult Hector about that matter. Unexpectedly, Lucian ignored him and strode right in. "Mr. Farwell, you can't do this." The butler trailed behind Lucian in nervousness. Still, he didn't dare to reach out and block the latter's way forward. Hence, he could only attempt to stop Lucian by repeatedly persuading him. Lucian disregarded the butler's words as only the images of Roxanne lying on the hospital bed filled his mind. "Jack will have to provide me with an explanation today." "Mr. Farwell. Mr. Farwell." Meanwhile, Hector was watering plants in the back garden. He froze in bafflement when he heard the butler's panicky voice. "Mr. Farwell? Is he referring to Lucian Farwell? Why is that brat here? I don't recall the Damaris family having anything to do with the Farwell family. If I must be pedantic, perhaps the 2 episodes of conflict we had when doing business can count. Nevertheless, the Farwell family bested us on both occasions. I wonder what could have prompted his advent.
Thank you for listening. If you have enjoyed this story, please like and share so others can see it too. Also hit the subscription button and notification bell so you can be notified on our next release. Thank you for your support. God bless you.